Is it gonna fit? Our front yard used to be a wasteland. Rotting bark chips, overgrown plants, no fence, no privacy. It was a waste of space. Over time, we've done it up. We've installed a fence, a new deck which overhangs a pond. We've done a Japanese themed garden and it's slowly growing in. But there's just this big empty space that needs to be filled, and it would be perfect for a planter box. To make the frame of the planter box, I'm going to be using galvanized steel from Paramount Browns in South Australia. It's just 50 by 50 millimeter sections. You can use treated pine for this and that'll last almost as long. I'm not going to be doing that because it's near the pond. I've done that for every project in the front yard actually. The fence and the deck. Anything that runs off the deck will go straight into the pond because it's right underneath. So the planter box is going to be 1500 millimeters long, which means that this will need to be 1462 millimeters to account for the 19 mil wood on each side. So we'll measure this up. Because I'm cutting with an angle grinder, I'll always use a square. Just trace that around the whole way. Time for the same thing, but 3 more times. So I've cut the pieces now, and I've placed them inside the area that the planter box is going to be. The reason I like to do that is because the ground's not necessarily perfectly flat, and it's way better just to guarantee that it's going to fit where it's meant to go versus it being straight and us having to grind down the concrete to make it fit. So I think 680 millimeters is going to be a really nice height to have it. It'll put the top of the metal just below here, and then we'll have a piece of wood covering the top to bring it up just almost flush with the top. Time to cut the vertical pieces. So the height that we need to bring it to is 680 millimeters, but because we've got the horizontal piece that's going to sit on top, we've got to cut our new pieces to 630 mil. So these are 50 by 50. It's always tempting to measure out multiple at a time, but because your blade, no matter what you're cutting with, is going to have its own width, and the cut width will be sort of 1.5 mil. It's never worth doing that. You're never going to get it as exact as if you measure it every individual time. So now I've cut the verticals and the horizontal lengthways pieces. I haven't cut the pieces that will go here yet. I'm going to make 2 rectangles, weld those together, and then I'll cut these to connect once I've figured out exactly the dimension that we need. Again, I like working in the space versus working somewhere else and bringing it in, because the reality is that none of this stuff is perfect. Concrete's not perfectly straight, even the deck isn't going to be exactly straight, and neither is the windowsill. The other thing is, this isn't going to be moved anywhere else, so it doesn't matter if this fits in someone else's yard, this is where it's going to go. So to do this, I'm going to be using gasless MIG. It's really simple, really easy. It's not as clean a final product as if it were gassed, but honestly, for something like this, gasless is perfect. So I've tack welded these ones in place, but I'll give them a full weld now. Both of them, as you can see, you're getting an idea of the height, and then we'll just do these connections in a bit. Before you start any of these projects, figure out which dimensions and which references are important. If you have something that's out by 5 millimeters following this direction, it's obvious. If you have something which is out 5 millimeters relative to the concrete pad or relative to the edge of the house horizontally, people won't notice. Figure out, is something flat? Are you going to do it relative to actual horizontal? Or are you going to do it relative to the horizontal lines of your house, your deck, whatever's around? So today's going to be super hot, so all I'm going to do is just a little bit of spray painting, and then I'm going to call it. First off, we'll use etch primer just on any of the welds. Now I'm not completely finished with the welding. I might still do a little bit more, but I'm going to put some kill rust on the main sections. It's the black satin enamel. It'll stick really well and protect it long term. So now that I've done the bulk of the frame, I'm just going to use some of these thinner metal pieces as cross members. They're just leftovers from previous projects. The plant box frame is now completely done. I've given it a coat of paint and I've come inside just to have a coffee because otherwise I would literally be watching paint dry. The next steps are going to be to do the outside of the box. I think ordinarily you'd probably do the inside first, but I've got all the wood ready for the outside and I've done it in such a way that I can put in the internal sheeting without needing to access it from the outside. Next steps are going to be to sand and stain the Kapur or camphor wood that I picked up from Softwoods yesterday. Once that's done, I can chuck that on the outside. So I've just cut all the wood panels and I'm about to stain them. It's really important to be super generous when doing this because it's got to survive in the sun. I tend to use really cheap paintbrushes to do this because they get really gummed up. So once the timber's stained, you can just screw it in. I'm using these 8-gauge metal tech screws. What you've got to be careful for is if you've got any of these holes, you can't screw into this, so you'll have to move it around. I like to keep it relatively consistent so that all the screws are in the same line. I think at the top I can't do that, but everywhere else I should be able to. Make sure you're drilling through your wood as well. It's a really good way to undo all the effort you put in staining, cutting, sanding by just tapping straight through it. This will split every time. I like to clamp it in place. It makes it a little bit easier to screw into and it helps it so that it doesn't shift while you're doing it. I also can't stress enough how good an investment an impact driver is. Get a decent quality one. You'll use it all the time. The last part's pretty simple. It's just going to be putting the wood inside the planter box. You can kind of use whatever you want, especially if you're going to paint it. It's just got to be thick enough, especially on the bottom. I'm going to be using marine ply for the sides, and then I've got plywood for setting concrete that I'm going to use as the bottom. It's super stiff, quite thick, and it's very weather resistant. We're still going to put a pond liner on top, so I'm not too stressed about it being waterproof, but it's going to be outside, so it's kind of got to last, and it's going to be supporting the weight of this garden bed. I'm using a table saw. Just use whatever kind of saw that you've got. You could use a jigsaw. I'll probably have to use that for the corners, but ideally some sort of circular saw is going to make your life a bit easier. You can always go to your hardware store and get them to cut it down for you to size. So I've got the wood here and I've just got to fit it in through the back. So I'm just going to cut this down to 1380 because that's the diagonal on the back. and then that's going to be able to be sort of slotted in and then fall down. I've cut down the wood, and now it's time to just take corners out so that the metal pole don't get in the way. When you make yours, you can take a little bit more care than I did to measure it out and not cut out too much, but it's going to be covered by the pond liner, so I don't really care. Next, we're going to rip down the sides. I've just got to shorten this by 35. I'm just going to screw it into the side. Again, this doesn't need to be watertight, it's just holding a pond liner. So all of these are now in, and what I'd suggest doing is just screwing around the top. The other thing that you'll probably want to do is once it's all in, drill a hole through the liner and through this board for drainage. What I'm going to do is I'll put a bulkhead in and run the bulkhead into a pipe, and the pipe's just going to go underneath this deck. It's quite heavy, so I'm going to probably need to get a hand to put it in place and see if it fits. Okay. Is it going to fit? Oh, so this is the pond liner I've got. It's 3 by 2 meters, which should be plenty. So I've put the pond liner in, and I'm just about to screw this on. But all I've done is I've just used a bit of cloth tape and secured it in position, and I'm going to screw this on top of it, and that's just going to clamp it down. I'm going to leave the cloth tape because you're not going to see it, and it's not like it's going to cause it to rust. One of the final steps is to add the bulkhead for the drainage of the planter box. It'll be pretty straightforward. We're just going to use a hole saw and drill through down here. We're going to put potting mix through it so that it'll have pretty decent drainage everywhere else, and it can make its way to this bulkhead. The opening's relatively small, but it doesn't need to be huge because it's not dealing with large flow rates. It just needs to be able to drip out. On the underside, we're going to have a pipe which will just run straight underneath the deck. I've just cut the hole, and all hopes and dreams of this planter box being a pond are gone. We've got a hole just down here, and it's already draining. Now that the bulkhead's in, I'm just going to put in the soil. And with that, the planter box is done. I've got a dwarf lemon and a lime tree in there. The lime tree isn't a dwarf variety, but by trimming it to the height that we want it, it's going to stay around that height, and it should still fruit. I've also got a hose reel on this side that I've just screwed in. It's very basic, but it's just going to be to store our hose, which is normally stored around the corner. Additionally, we're going to have some plants down there, little creeping plants. I was thinking pothos or devil's ivy, and that's just going to cover up any of the concrete down the bottom. And the great thing with that is that I'm going to be able to take it out and put things underneath the planter box, like for the couch cushions, which the couch is going to go across here, and whenever we're not using them, the cushions are going to go in boxes and be stored underneath here, so they're waterproof and completely out of the elements. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know if you've made a planter box like this, plan to, or even are just interested. I'll make sure to respond to every comment and answer any of your questions where I can.